When one of Europe's biggest clubs drops out of the Champions League, people act as though the world has just imploded. From Manchester United's perspective, the Europa League might as well be the Papa John's trophy. For Barcelona, second place is considered an aberration, and if PSG miss out on the league and title, well, they'd best immediately buy Monaco's best player for £160 million and then watch on with glee as the rest of Europe's vultures pick their squad apart. You all know what I'm talking about. When one of the Premier League's big six go on a poor run of form, millions of people across the world descend into hysteria. Sack the manager, sack the board, I've put my season ticket in a blender, I'm making a TikTok of me burning my shirt, and then I'm going to live stream myself driving a pitchfork through my leg with Ole Gunnar Solskjaer's face on it, just so that everyone knows how angry I am that we drew 2-2 away at Southampton. God forbid if one of the top six in England ever actually did get relegated again, some people's brains might actually spontaneously combust. Yet in Brazil, this type of unthinkable scenario is threatening to become almost par for the course. In 2009, Fluminense avoided relegation from the Campeonato Brasileiro Série A by just 1 point. The following season, they won their first league title since 1984, finishing 2 points clear of anyone else at the top of the table. Flamengo, meanwhile, suffered almost the exact opposite fate. They finished as Brazilian champions in 2009, 2 points clear of second place Internacional, and the following season they dropped all the way down to 14th place, finishing just 2 points above the relegation zone only 12 months on. I could give you many more examples of the madness of the Campeonato Brasileiro, which is rapidly becoming one of the most unpredictable major football leagues on earth, but you probably already get the idea. Even in the weird world of Brazilian football though, where wild swings from one season to the next are not uncommon, the demise of one club over the last couple of years stands out. I'm referring to Cruzeiro Esporte Clube, more commonly referred to simply as Cruzeiro, or by their nickname, Raposa, which just means fox. One of Brazil's so-called Big 12, Cruzeiro are among the nation's most successful clubs. Having been founded in 1921, Cruzeiro are a young club compared to other Brazilian giants, with Sao Paulo the only Big 12 team to have been founded more recently than them. When Cruzeiro were first formed in 1921, they were called Yale Atlético Clube, then Società Sportiva Ipiranga, Palestra Mineiro, and eventually Palestra Italia. The last of those names was the most revealing since the club was founded by Italian immigrants from the city of Belo Horizonte, and until 1925 they adopted an Italian-only policy when it came to fielding players. That would eventually change, and once the club opened up to players from more diverse backgrounds, success followed. They won their first Campeonato Mineiro title in 1928, and it would prove to be the first of 3 consecutive state championships. The name Cruzeiro wasn't introduced until 1942, when the Brazilian government banned the use of names and symbols that related to the 3 major Axis powers during World War II: Germany, Italy, and Japan. Out went Palestra Italia, and eventually in came Cruzeiro Esporte Clube. It was also at this time that Cruzeiro changed their club colours from red, white and green, resembling the Italian flag, to their modern day colours of blue and white, although ironically enough, that actually makes their kit more reminiscent of the colours of the Italian national team. Over the next 8 decades, Cruzeiro established themselves as heavyweights in the Brazilian game. They are 4-time Brazilian champions, having won 2 titles in the last 7 years. They are the most successful team in the history of the Copa do Brasil, with 6 successes in Brazil's premier domestic cup competition to their name, and they have reached 4 Copa Libertadores finals, winning 2. Cruzeiro is the club of Ronaldo, Tostão and Maicon. When Brazil won the World Cup in emphatic style in 1970, Cruzeiro were the only club, along with the great Santos team of that era, to have multiple players in Mario Zagallo's starting 11 in the final. By almost any measure, Cruzeiro are one of not just Brazil, but South America's biggest clubs. And yet right now, Cruzeiro is a club in disarray, spiralling out of control and headed for disaster. It's a demise that would have been hard to fathom only a couple of years ago, when Cruzeiro was still qualifying for the Copa Libertadores, but now they find themselves in a relegation battle in Serie B, the second tier of Brazilian football. Our story starts in 2017, when Wagner Pires de Sá took over as Cruzeiro president, along with Itar Machado as his assistant. Cruzeiro had just slumped to a disappointing 12th place finish in 2016, but Pires arrived promising to return Cruzeiro to their glories from only a couple of years earlier, and claiming that, on his watch, Raposa would fight for the Libertadores. It's worth noting that Cruzeiro were consecutive Brasileiro champions in 2013 and 2014, so very recent success was in their veins. Although Cruzeiro had finished 12th in 2016, they still had the backbone of a very decent team, and one could argue that it was tweaks rather than wholesale changes that were required in order for the club to challenge once again. Initially, under Pires, there were some promising indications. Former club favourite Lucas Silva was brought back to Belo Horizonte on loan from Real Madrid, along with former Arsenal midfielder Denilson, who arrived on loan from Emirati outfit Al Wahda. The club even brought in a right-back by the name of John Lennon, so it was all starting to come together, and supporters could be forgiven for starting to imagine something special was happening. Indeed it was, in many respects. Between 2017 and 2018, Cruzeiro won 3 trophies in 2 years, in the form of 2 Campeonato Mineiro titles and 1 Copa do Brasil. Their success was built in no small part around 5 key men, only one of whom had actually arrived on Pires' watch. In midfield, the combination of former Vélez Sarsfield duo Lucas Romero and Ariel Cabral, along with former Palmeiras man Robinho, was an effective one. Meanwhile, Brazilian and Uruguayan internationals Thiago Neves and Georgian de Arrascaeta scored a hatful of goals, both operating in free roles as either withdrawn forwards or attacking midfielders. Whilst it wasn't enough to propel Cruzeiro to the Brasileiro, the club was never consistent enough to challenge for the domestic title. They were a force to be reckoned with on their day, as they proved in multiple cup competitions, famously thrashing Vasco da Gama 4-0 and Universidad de Chile 7-0 in the 2018 Copa Libertadores. Less than 2 years on from the conclusion of Cruzeiro's 2018 double-winning campaign, none of those 5 players are still at the club. Ariel Cabral is the only one still under contract at Cruzeiro, but even he is currently on loan at Goiás. Following the initial promise of Pires' presidency, worrying reports started to come out of the club. Cruzeiro had high levels of debt for a number of years, but that debt had spiralled under Pires. Despite those concerns, the club added further financial burdens during the off-season, spending over £3 million to sign wideman David from Vitória, and then loading themselves with the hefty wage demands of veteran international centre-forward Fred, who came in from Atlético Mineiro for in excess of £2 million himself. Although there was plenty of noise surrounding the club, Cruzeiro actually went into the 2019 Brasileiro as one of the division's favourites. The season got off to a fairly strong start for the club as well, as they went on a 21-game unbeaten run. They didn't lose a single game in the Campeonato Mineiro, they won 5 out of a possible 6 games in the group stages of the Copa Libertadores, and they won 2 of their first 3 league games in the Brasileiro. However, in May of 2019, Brazilian TV network Rede Globo aired an episode of Fantastico, which is a popular 2-hour-long show featuring award-winning reports which focused on Cruzeiro. The broadcast exposed a major corruption scandal at the heart of the club, scathing accounts of the club's management regime, and accusations of widespread financial irregularities. It would be the beginning of the end for Cruzeiro and for Wagner Pires. Controversy courted both the club and the president for the entire rest of the season, as fans bayed for blood. On the pitch, results fell off a cliff. From May onwards, Cruzeiro only won 6 out of their remaining 47 games that season in all competitions, as they were dumped out of both cup competitions and hurtled down the league table. In August, manager Mano Menezes was sacked and replaced by Sao Paulo legend Rogério Ceni. The once prolific number 1 would last little more than a month in the job, following a run of 4 league games without a win, although his dismissal only further derailed the sinking Giants. Another ex-Brazilian international took his place, namely Abel Braga, a man who has had more clubs than Tiger Woods. For all of his experience though, Braga couldn't salvage the situation at Cruzeiro, lasting almost exactly 2 months in charge. Cruzeiro's 4th and final manager of the campaign, and also the man who would ensure their relegation, was another former Brazilian international centre-back and journeyman head coach. Adilson Batista came in with only 3 games of the season remaining. All 3 came against fellow traditional Big 12 teams, namely Vasco, Grêmio and Palmeiras, 2 of whom finished in the top 4 that season. To have any chance of staying in the division, Cruzeiro would have to take at least 3 points from their last 3 games. They lost all 3. Although their biggest rivals for survival, Sierra failed to win any of their last 7 games, nor did Cruzeiro, and their fate was sealed. In the club's final game of the season, at home to Palmeiras, fans let their feelings be known. The game had to be halted in the 85th minute, shortly after Palmeiras took a 2-0 lead, as anger erupted in the stands. Fans began ripping seats out of the ground and firing makeshift missiles towards the pitch. 40 TVs on the stadium's concourse were destroyed. The large police presence gathered at the ground had expected trouble, and they responded with rubber bullets and tear gas. It was a sad scene, as a stadium that had been bouncing only a year earlier was left looking more like a war zone. Angry fans took to the streets as the reality of relegation began to dawn. Cruzeiro were one of only 4 Brazilian clubs to have never been relegated in their entire 98-year history, along with Santos, Sao Paulo and Flamengo. That record was gone, but Cruzeiro's problems certainly were not. A mass exodus followed during the off-season, including club president Wagner Pires de Sá, who resigned within weeks of the season's conclusion, with angry fans still confronting him on the streets of Belo Horizonte. Cruzeiro have been subject to numerous legal challenges, which has only increased the club's debt pile. They face accusations of money laundering, illegally tapping up young players, and failure to pay both clubs and players on time. Former midfielder Bruno Silva has taken the club to court over failure to pay his wages, meanwhile Emirati outfit Al Wahda took a case against Cruzeiro to FIFA over the club's failure to pay the loan fee that they had agreed for Denilson. FIFA found in favour of Al Wahda and issued Cruzeiro with a 6-point deduction ahead of their first season of second-tier football, a crushing blow for the club, especially given the fact that Denilson only ever played 3 games for them. If anything, the 2020 season has been even more catastrophic for Cruzeiro than 2019. In a year of chaos worldwide, Brazil's fallen giant certainly have not been immune. Football in Brazil was suspended between March 17th and July 25th due to the COVID-19 pandemic, meaning we are only 19 games into the 38-game Campeonato Brasileiro Série B campaign right now. Extraordinarily, in spite of that fact, Cruzeiro are already onto their 4th manager of the season, and their 8th in less than 2 years. It's a turnover of coaches that would make the Watford owners queasy, and their most recent appointment has been their most notable. Between August and October, Cruzeiro went on a run of 13 games in which they only emerged victorious twice. Given their initial points deduction, as imposed by FIFA due to the Denilson transfer, that run of form left them considering the genuine threat of relegation into Brazil's 3rd tier. At the start of last month, supporters stormed the club's training ground to voice their displeasure at the team's management, performances and results. Action had to be taken, and manager Ney Franco was handed the Brazilian equivalent of a P45 after just 4 weeks in charge, as new president Sergio Santos Rodrigues felt he had identified the ideal replacement. And so, 3 weeks ago, Cruzeiro appointed Luiz Felipe Scolari as their new first-team manager. It isn't Scolari's first stint in Belo Horizonte. He managed Cruzeiro at the turn of the millennium, and the World Cup winning former Brazil and Chelsea boss arrives fresh off the back of his 3rd stint managing Palmeiras. Scolari's stock may not be as high as it was when he guided the Seleção to a World Cup in 2002, but it's only 2 years since he was named as Brasileiro Coach of the Year and put the shame of losing 7-1 to Germany at the 2014 World Cup behind him by lifting the Brasileiro title with Palmeiras. It's unclear whether Scolari is managing Cruzeiro out of goodwill and because, at the age of 71, he is looking for a project that inspires him, or whether the club has taken an enormous financial gamble despite already being in a perilous position from an economic standpoint. Since Scolari came in, results have picked up. Cruzeiro are unbeaten in 4 games under him and 5 games in total. A couple of victories at the back end of October has lifted the club out of the relegation zone, for now, at least at the time of this recording. Cruzeiro will have played an extra fixture by the time you're watching this video against fellow relegation rivals Botafogo SP. At the time of this recording, Cruzeiro sit 1 place and 1 point above the relegation zone, although the team below them does have a game in hand. Cruzeiro's demise is among the most emphatic reminders that the phrase "too big to fail" really doesn't apply to Brazilian football. The club's relegation in 2019, hot off the heels of a double-winning campaign, and coming during a season in which they were still competing in the Libertadores, is the most high-profile relegation in South American football since River Plate in 2011. If Cruzeiro were to drop into the 3rd tier, it would be among the most devastating falls from grace in not just the history of South American football, but the game worldwide. The club certainly has the talent, and now the coach, to drag them out of the mire. But when it comes to chaos off the pitch, an end certainly doesn't appear to be in sight yet. We often hear the phrase, "a club in crisis," to refer to a team on a sketchy run of form, but Cruzeiro are a club in a real crisis, and question marks surrounding whether they can turn their fortunes around still loom large over the Mineirão. That is it for today's video, but thank you all as ever for watching. A big hello to all of our Brazilian viewers, and apologies for the fact that my Brazilian Portuguese pronunciations are quite so appalling. I will keep trying to learn, and hopefully I can keep making more videos about South American football in the future. Hit the like button if you enjoyed today's video, feel free to leave your thoughts down below in the comment section, and go ahead and subscribe and turn on notifications for HITC Sevens, because you'd be foolish not to. You can also find me on Twitter or Instagram by the username @HITC Sevens, and follow me should you wish to do so.